On the morning of March 5th, 1979, two FBI agents showed up at the door of a small house in Arlington Heights, Illinois. The place sat in a quiet patch northwest of Chicago, a stretch of streets lined with ranch houses that all looked a bit alike. Folks there mostly worried about simple things like whether the Cubs might finally put together a halfway decent season. The agents weren't there to drag anyone out or run a raid. They had come because of a phone call from the previous Friday night. A call from a couple who said their 13-year-old son had stumbled onto something that should not have existed. Something that, if real, pointed to one of the most advanced Soviet intelligence schemes ever discovered inside the United States. What the boy had found was a functioning cipher buried in the Sears, Roebuck and Company catalog, the thick volume that showed up in millions of mailboxes and ended up on coffee tables from Maine to California. During the months that followed, at least 10 people would be arrested, a hidden communication chain would be torn apart, and the way American counterintelligence thought about secret message drops and coded signals would shift in a lasting way. The boy was named Michael Hartley, and to make sense of what he uncovered, you have to know who he was and what the world looked like in the spring of 1979. By then, the Cold War had been dragging on for more than 3 long decades. It had eased a bit from the almost world-ending tension of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but spying between the United States and the Soviet Union stayed relentless. The KGB and the CIA kept running agents through each other's capitals. The American intelligence community was still shaken by the recent exposure of CIA domestic surveillance programs revealed during the Church Committee hearings, leaving many people uneasy and suspicious. That mood seeped into daily life, shaping how Americans saw their own government and the threats beyond their borders. At the same time, the Soviets had already been caught running at least 3 major spy networks across the United States during the 1970s, and counterintelligence officers were sure more were still out there, buried in suburbs and office buildings, waiting to be uncovered. Michael lived with his parents, Gordon and Patricia Hartley, and his younger sister, Rachel. Their neighborhood was the kind of place where every parent knew every kid, and children stayed out on their bikes until the streetlights blinked on. Gordon worked as an electrical engineer at Motorola's Arlington Heights facility. Patricia filled in as a substitute teacher at the local middle school. Michael attended that same school, where he had a reputation for being quiet and brilliant, different in ways adults struggled to put into words. This was 1979. Autism spectrum disorder wouldn't show up in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual until 1980. Most people in America had never heard the term unless they'd later see Rain Man, which wouldn't come out until 1988. But Michael's parents already understood that their son's mind didn't run the way other children's did. He spoke late, nearly 4 years old before he put together clear sentences, yet by the time he turned 6, he could read at a high school level and seemed to absorb information at a pace that startled anyone who spent time with him. He had a hard time looking people in the eye, and even the easiest small talk felt like climbing a wall. Loud sounds or any sudden shift in his routine could shut him down fast, and when something grabbed his interest, it took over his whole world. He could stay locked onto a single topic for months or even years, digging into it with a focus that pushed everything else aside. Lately, ever since the previous summer, that focus had turned toward patterns. Not just general patterns, but numerical ones, and more specifically, the world of codes and ciphers. It all began when his father walked in with a library book titled The Code Breakers by David Kahn, a massive history of cryptography running more than 1,200 pages. Most kids of 13 would have glanced at a few chapters and wandered off. Michael didn't. He read the entire thing 3 times in a row, going page by page until he practically memorized sections of it. After that, he started hunting down every single book on codes that the Arlington Heights library system owned, piling them on his desk and renewing them again and again. He taught himself how substitution ciphers worked, how transposition ciphers scrambled messages, why one-time pads were considered unbreakable, and how the Enigma machine operated. He read about the Navajo code talkers, Julius Caesar's simple cipher, and the story behind the Zimmerman telegram. He filled notebook after notebook with encryption systems he invented on his own, building complicated methods to hide messages that said completely ordinary things like, "I fed the dog," or "It's raining today." These weren't secrets. They didn't need protecting. He encoded them simply because he loved the structure, the logic, the clean precision of hiding information in plain sight. His parents saw no harm in it. In a way, they even found it endearing. When Michael latched onto something, he went all in, with a level of energy that could wear you out just watching him, but also left you a little amazed. Patricia Hartley later told investigators that she sometimes feared he would struggle with friendships or with moments that demanded quick social judgment or emotional reading. But she never once questioned his intelligence. Everyone agreed he was extremely bright. His teachers saw the same thing. His math teacher, Elena Kowalski, told the FBI that by October he had more or less stopped taking part in her 8th grade algebra lessons. He had taught himself calculus over the summer and no longer found the normal coursework interesting. While she explained quadratic equations to the rest of the class, Michael sat in the back working through college math textbooks he had checked out from the public library. The Sears catalog entered his world the same way it entered millions of American households, dropped through the mail like clockwork. The spring and summer 1979 edition showed up at the Hartley home during the first week of February. It was a 400-page giant weighing a little more than 2 pounds, its glossy sheets packed with everything you could imagine: washing machines, wedding rings, power tools, patio sets, boys' jeans, fishing gear. By then, the catalog had been part of American culture since 1888, a familiar presence in homes across the country. To most people, it served as a simple shopping guide, a way to look through products without leaving the living room. But for Michael Hartley, it turned into something far different, something that would pull him in the same way cryptography had, opening another world for him to explore and dissect piece by piece. He first sensed something unusual on February 11, 1979, a quiet Sunday afternoon. The family had come home from church not long before, and Michael had stretched out on the living room floor with the catalog open in front of him. Nothing about that scene was new. He often spent hours paging through catalogs, phone books, or thick dictionaries, not because he planned to buy anything, make calls, or absorb long lists of definitions, but because he liked how everything was arranged. The order of it steadied him. He liked the neat structure, the way big piles of information were broken into clean sections that made sense to him. On this afternoon, he had flipped to the automotive pages, the ones filled with car batteries, filters, and motor oil, and something there tugged at him. A few product descriptions didn't sit right. They weren't flat out wrong, but their phrasing felt off, like someone had written them while thinking in another language. Most readers would have skimmed past without a second thought, chalking it up to lazy editing or some minor printing glitch. But that wasn't how Michael's mind operated. When a pattern slipped out of place, it got under his skin, the same way a wrong note would bother someone with perfect pitch. So he started over. He went back to the beginning of the section, then the one before it, then forward again, turning each page and reading every line. And as he kept going, more of those strange little sentences surfaced. They sat deep in the blocks of tiny text, quiet and easy to miss, showing up maybe once every 40 or 50 pages. They looked harmless, but each one broke a rule that the rest of the catalog followed. He grabbed a fresh composition notebook and began writing them down. He listed the exact phrasing, the page, the product type, and the item number. The process was slow and would have worn down most kids his age, but it calmed him. The steady rhythm of searching, checking, and recording felt almost like breathing. By the end of that first day, he had 17 odd phrases copied into the notebook. After a full week, he had 43. The phrases themselves read like plain technical statements, tested under extreme northern conditions, available in regional markets only, recommended for industrial applications. Nothing about them stood out at first glance. That was the point, he thought. Thousands of descriptions in the catalog used the same kind of language.
But these specific lines bent the patterns the rest of the book followed, breaking small rules of grammar or logic that no normal reader would bother noticing. On February 18th, exactly 1 week after he had begun, Michael decided to check a growing suspicion. He had been reading about number stations, those strange shortwave broadcasts that rattled out long strings of words or digits, widely believed to be coded instructions for agents working behind enemy borders. They had been heard since World War I, monitored for decades, and never officially acknowledged by any government. The secrecy around them fascinated him. He wondered if the odd catalog lines might serve a similar purpose. Messages disguised as dull product notes, hidden in plain sight, meant for people who knew the pattern and could pull meaning from it while everyone else flipped past without noticing a thing. He began with the most straightforward method he could think of, the same simple trick people had leaned on in old ciphers for hundreds of years. He grabbed the first letter of every odd phrase, keeping them in the exact order they appeared as he moved through the catalog from front to back, and lined those letters up in a row. Terry Motel Cap. Just a string of nonsense. He then tried the last letters of each phrase, hoping they might form something clearer. Still useless. After that, he took the first letter of every second phrase, then every third, then every fifth, stretching the pattern out in different ways to see if anything clicked. He even tested a few numerology shortcuts, turning letters into numbers and checking for hidden sums. He scanned the product codes, looking for some clean pattern or tidy equation. None of it gave him anything. Days slipped by, then weeks. Michael filled sheet after sheet in his notebook with attempts that went nowhere. Anyone else would have stopped. Anyone else would have shrugged and figured the phrases were only strange because product writers sometimes wrote strange things. But once Michael decided there was a pattern, his mind locked on to the idea. Letting go felt impossible.
Later, his mother would tell FBI investigators how he came home from school, grabbed a quick snack, and walked straight to his room to attack what he called the catalog problem. Some evenings he missed dinner completely because he was so wrapped up in his notes he didn't hear her calling. His grades, always near the top, dipped a little. Not because he struggled, but because every spare minute went into the code instead of his assignments. The turning point arrived on March 2, 1979, almost 3 full weeks after he'd started. Michael lay in bed that evening, turning over each approach he had burned through. He had been treating the text as if the message lived inside those awkward lines. But what if the text wasn't the message at all? What if it only pointed toward something else? He got up, switched on his desk lamp, and opened the catalog again. He looked at one of the odd phrases he had marked, tested under extreme northern conditions, found on page 487 in the description for a set of jumper cables, item number 369,427. Maybe the numbers mattered more than the wording. He wrote down only the numbers tied to each strange phrase, the page count and the item count, 487, 369,427. He tried adding them, subtracting them, checking for primes, hoping for a spark. Still blank. Then he remembered a piece from the old Codebreakers books, a section on book codes where sequences of numbers pointed to specific pages, lines, and single words in a book both people already owned. Both sides needed the same addition for the trick to work. The Sears catalog fit this perfectly. Millions of identical copies in homes across America, free, common, almost invisible. So what if these numbers weren't a message, but directions leading him to other spots in the catalog? He went back to the first odd phrase he'd found on page 127, tied to item number 84,634, and started again with this new idea in mind. He flipped the catalog open to page 84 and paused. On that page, he moved his finger down to line 62 and then over to the 34th character. It turned out to be the letter M, so he wrote it down, without thinking too much about it. Then he picked up the second odd phrase on his list, the one tied to page 316 and the strange item number 528915. He went to page 52, counted down to line 89, then over to character 15. That gave him a T. He added it beside the M. He kept going, checking the third, fourth, and fifth phrases the same way, and the scattered letters started forming something that looked like M-T-Y-S-U-N-D-A-Y. He stared at those 7 characters for a long moment, trying to make sense of why they fit together at all. Then it hit him in small steps. Empty Sunday. Mount Sunday.
Empty Sunday again. And after that, the meaning finally settled. It was not saying empty, it was short for something else. Meeting Sunday. Meet Sunday. His hands started to shake as he pushed through the rest of the strange phrases he had logged. There were 43 in total, and each one produced a new piece of the message once he applied the same page-line character method hidden inside the item numbers. When he finished all 43, the whole thing came out clean and chilling. Sunday, 1800, Grant Park, Bench 47, Red Scarf, confirm via usual channel, package ready. Michael stayed frozen at his desk, staring at the line he had copied. For the first time in the 3 weeks he had been digging into this puzzle, fear cut through the excitement. This stopped being a harmless problem set. Someone had planted a coded message inside the Sears catalog, a real message. It pointed to a meeting in Grant Park in Chicago. It named a time, 1800 hours, 6 in the evening on a Sunday, and even described a person who would be there wearing a red scarf. It said a package was ready. The tone, the deliberate secrecy, the rigid structure, all of it pointed in one direction: espionage. He went downstairs and found his parents in the den, where the television was running a sitcom none of them cared about. His father sat with a newspaper open. His mother kept knitting without looking at the screen. Michael stopped at the doorway, unsure how to lead into any of this, then said the first thing that came to him. "I need to show you something." His voice must have carried enough weight because both parents looked up right away. They followed him up to his room where he had spread the catalog, his notes, his messy earlier attempts, and the final clean version of the decoded message. He walked them through everything, showing how he had spotted the pattern and how the system worked. Gordon Hartley reacted with doubt at first. He lifted the notebook, flipped through the numbers, checked the catalog, and asked Michael if he was absolutely sure he had not miscounted or mixed something up. Michael went through the process again, slow and steady. Gordon, being an engineer, understood the logic. He could see the pattern was real and not something imagined. Patricia Hartley asked the next question, the one none of them wanted to face. What were they supposed to do with this? Michael admitted he had no idea, and that was why he had come to them at all. The 3 of them stayed in his room for close to an hour, trading possibilities. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was part of some odd marketing stunt. Maybe it was a puzzle or a treasure hunt cooked up by someone with too much time. But none of those guesses felt solid, and each new minute made the room feel heavier. But the tone of that message did not match any harmless theory they had tossed around. Meet Sunday, Grant Park, red scarf, package ready. It carried the feel of tradecraft, the kind of clipped wording people in intelligence used when they wanted to pass instructions without drawing attention. Gordon decided they had to reach out to the FBI. It was already after 10 on a Friday night, yet he thumbed through the phone book, found the number for the FBI office in Chicago, and called the main line. A duty officer picked up. Gordon laid out what they had stumbled onto, stressing that he believed the note might be a coded signal for espionage. He tried to make it clear that he wasn't joking, that he understood how strange it sounded, but meant every word. The officer listened, wrote down the details, took the Hartley family's address and phone number, and said the case would be passed along. Gordon hung up, unsure if anything would come of it. half expecting the call to vanish into the weekend. But it didn't. On Monday morning, March 5th, an FBI agent named Thomas Kovach phoned the Hartley house. Gordon had already left for work, so Patricia answered. She told Kovach that her husband had made the call, but that their son was the one who had actually uncovered the pattern. Kovach asked if he could stop by later that day. Patricia agreed. Around 3 that afternoon, Kovach showed up. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a dark suit that made him appear calm and sharp at the same time. He was polite, though his manner showed that he was reserving judgment. Patricia poured coffee while he settled at the kitchen table. Michael walked in from school around 3:30 and froze for a moment at the sight of an FBI agent in their kitchen. Kovach asked him to go through everything from the start. Michael pulled out the catalog, his notes, and explained each step he had taken, the same way he had walked his parents through it. Kovach listened closely, slowing Michael down now and then to ask for details, filling pages with notes. He kept circling back to timing. When had the catalog arrived? February 7th. When had Michael first spotted the odd pattern? February 11th. When had he finally solved it? March the 2nd. So the message had been sitting untouched for close to a month before anyone understood it. The meeting point in the message, Meet Sunday, might already have passed. Several Sundays had come and gone since the catalog showed up. But Kovach explained that the catalog never landed everywhere at once. It rolled out in waves over several weeks, reaching some regions early and others late. If the message was genuine, then the Sunday mentioned was likely tied to when a recipient got the catalog, not a fixed date on the calendar. It might mean the first Sunday after delivery or a Sunday a set number of weeks later. That kind of flexible timing was typical in systems built to handle uneven distribution. When the meeting wrapped up, Kovach gathered the catalog and all of Michael's notebooks. He said he would pass them to analysts for review.
Before he left, he asked the Hartleys to keep quiet about the whole thing, gave them his direct number, and told them to call if anything else came to mind. Then he walked out, and the Hartley family sat with the uneasy fact that their kid might have stumbled onto a Soviet spy network and that the FBI had stepped straight into their lives. They had no idea that Agent Kovach had held back something big. He didn't mention that the FBI had been hunting for this exact type of scheme for years. Soviet intelligence had a long record of finding odd, clever ways to talk to their people. In the 1950s and the 1960s, they leaned on microdots, tiny photos shrunk down to the size of a typed period and slipped into letters or tucked inside magazines. They used invisible ink, bursts of radio traffic, and careful dead-drop setups where one agent left a package in some public place and another picked it up later, all without ever seeing each other. By the late 1970s, though, American counterintelligence had gotten sharp. Microdots showed up under a microscope. Invisible ink lit up after a simple chemical wash. Radio messages could be tracked back to the source. Dead drops could be watched. The FBI knew the Soviets had to be moving on to something cleaner, something harder to spot, but they had no clue what the replacement looked like. A message system hidden inside a mass-market catalog turned out to be almost too simple. The Sears catalog was everywhere, harmless and impossible to trace to any one person. A Soviet agent living in America could get it in the mail like anyone else, leave it out on a shelf or a copy table, flip through it whenever they wanted, and pull out the coded notes without the slightest risk of drawing attention. No strange radios humming in the closet. No sneaking off to parks or phone booths. No odd letters that might get intercepted. Just a catalog that millions of households received and never thought about twice. Within 2 days of Agent Kovach stepping into the Hartley home, a full team of FBI codebreakers and counterintelligence experts were digging through Michael's notes. They checked his steps, confirmed that the structure he'd found was real, and started working on who built it and how far it spread. They pulled older Sears catalogs from the FBI archive and from public libraries, reaching back 2 full years, and began combing through them for the same odd signals. and they found them. The fall 1978 catalog had the pattern. The spring 1978 catalog had it too. The fall 1977 catalog carried it as well. Each one held roughly between 35 and 50 product descriptions that sounded just a little off, and each one, when decoded with the same page line character setup Michael used, delivered a short message. The messages never rambled. They stuck to business. Meeting spots, hours to arrive, recognition cues,
Directions for picking up materials, confirmations that earlier information had gone through. Piece by piece, the FBI realized they were staring at a communication network that had been running in plain view for at least 2 years, maybe more, while nobody in America had noticed a thing. The investigation, which the FBI called Operation Catalog, grew fast and kept pulling in more people. FBI counterintelligence pushed to understand how those strange messages even ended up in the catalog. Sears, Roebuck and Company was based in Chicago, in the Sears Tower, finished in 1973 and, at that moment, the tallest building anywhere. The catalog itself came from a huge operation. Hundreds of workers handled the writing, editing, photography, design, and production. With that many hands on the project, slipping in a coded line meant someone on the inside had to be involved. It had to be a person who touched the text every day, someone able to slide in odd phrases without raising suspicion. FBI agents met with Sears executives on March 12, 1979. They kept the explanation vague, saying only that they were checking a possible security problem. They asked for a full list of everyone who took part in catalog production. Sears agreed without hesitation, even though the managers seemed confused about what the Bureau hoped to find. The list turned out long. More than 300 employees had at least some access to catalog content. The FBI started going through all of them, running background checks and digging into any hint of Soviet ties or unusual behavior. It was slow work, the kind that drags on because every detail needs attention. At the same time, agents tried to figure out who received the messages and how they were supposed to respond. The messages gave small hints. Meet Sunday, 1800, Grant Park, Bench 47, red scarf. Grant Park spread across a huge area downtown, right along Lake Michigan. Bench 47 could have meant nothing, since the park held hundreds of benches. But agents who knew the place remembered that many benches carried numbers, a quiet detail most people ignored. The numbered benches came from a sponsorship program. People could dedicate a bench to someone, and each bench showed a plaque with its number. Bench 47 was real. It sat on the east side of the park facing the water, a bit away from busy foot traffic. The FBI set up surveillance, even though they knew any meeting tied to the spring catalog had already happened. They also dug through older records, pulling past decoded messages from older catalogs. They looked for patterns in meeting spots and times. Something stood out. A few messages pointed to Chicago, but others mentioned Milwaukee, Detroit, and Cleveland. This wasn't tied to one city. It stretched across several, meaning the network was wider than they thought. The first solid break in finding the Sears insider came on March 24, 1979, almost 3 weeks after the investigation started. Background checks flagged a copywriter named Alexei Peterson, age 41, who worked inside the catalog division. Peterson was a naturalized American citizen, and his profile raised questions the agents could not ignore. Born in the Soviet Union, he later left for the United States in 1962 when he was 24, during one of those short windows when the Soviet government eased its rules on who could leave. Before that move, he had bounced between a few jobs and tried different fields,
And once he arrived in America, he kept doing the same, taking whatever work he could find, until he eventually settled into a position at Sears. His most recent role before that had been as a technical writer for a manufacturing firm. His history on paper looked solid, every reference checked out, and nothing in his background suggested trouble. During his 3 years at Sears, his supervisors had seen nothing that set off alarms. The FBI's deeper look told a different story. Sears had never learned that before coming to the United States, Peterson had spent 3 full years in the Soviet Army, including time assigned to military intelligence. That part of his past never appeared in his immigration forms. It didn't prove he was spying, but it gave investigators enough reason to keep a closer eye on him. With that justification, the FBI secured approval for surveillance. Agents began tracking his mail, listening to his calls, and following his daily routine. They even slipped an undercover officer into the Sears catalog division, a woman posing as a temporary copywriter whose real purpose was to watch how Peterson worked and how he interacted with others. Over the next several weeks, the picture that emerged looked steadily more troubling. Peterson kept irregular hours, often lingering in the office long after most coworkers had left. He had direct access to the catalog editing tools and made frequent small adjustments to product entries, the kind of small edits that usually pass through without any second glance. The undercover agent saw him doing this late at night, following a handwritten checklist he kept tucked in his desk. He guarded that list closely and never stepped away without taking it with him. On April 18, 1979, the FBI acted. Agents arrested Alexei Peterson at his home in Evanston, Illinois, at 6 o'clock in the morning. At the very same moment, 7 more people were taken into custody, 4 in Chicago, 2 in Milwaukee, and 1 in Cleveland, all believed to be linked to the same hidden communication network. The timing had been carefully arranged, so no one could alert anyone else. The whole operation stayed classified, and the method the FBI used to find the other members has still never been explained.
During the search of Peterson's home, agents uncovered what they had feared. Inside a dresser, beneath folded clothes and a false bottom, they found 3 items: a one-time pad used for secure coded messages, a cipher key, and a Soviet passport with his real name, Dmitry Kavern, not Alexei Peterson. Alongside those items lay a marked list showing product sections and page ranges for the upcoming fall 1979 Sears catalog, with notes in Russian marking which sections would carry the next hidden messages. The ring had been exposed, but the wider case remained unfinished. Peterson gave them nothing. He refused to answer questions, stated that he would remain silent, and immediately asked for a lawyer. The other people taken into custody, most of them Soviet nationals living in the United States on student or work visas, stayed silent too. Still, what agents pulled from their houses and small apartments laid out the situation in a straightforward way. These were KGB operatives running an organized network that had focused on gathering intelligence, and they had relied on the Sears catalog as their main way to pass messages for at least 2 years, and probably for far longer than that. Documents collected during the raids showed exactly what they had been after. They had stored technical details on American manufacturing tools, notes about how various industrial processes worked, reports on labor strikes, data on shifting economic conditions in important sectors, and even maps pointing to military sites and facilities tied to defense contractors. None of it rose to the level of top-tier military secrets, but it held clear value. He was the kind of steady, detailed economic and industrial material that helped Soviet planners judge American production strengths and weak points, and allowed them to shape their own strategies with more confidence. The group had managed to operate quietly for a long time, passing information through a method so ordinary and so deeply hidden within everyday life that no one bothered to question it. And the only reason anyone noticed was because a 13-year-old boy with autism and a deep fixation on codes stopped and studied the Sears catalog with more care than almost anyone in the country had ever given it. His curiosity and patience pulled a thread that adults had missed for years. The trial of Alexei Petition began in September 1979 in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. The case rested on the physical evidence collected during his arrest and the search of his home. Agents had found a one-time pad, cipher keys, and a Soviet passport, and these items matched the FBI's explanation of how the catalog code worked and how it had been used. Michael Hartley never took the stand. The FBI decided his testimony was unnecessary and believed it was safer to keep a minor away from public attention and out of any possible risk tied to revealing the person who had uncovered the spy ring. The trial ran for 6 weeks. In November 1979, Alexei Petition was convicted on 4 counts of espionage under the Espionage Act and received a sentence of 35 years in federal prison. The other defendants were given terms ranging from 10 to 25 years. 2 of those individuals, both Soviet nationals, were deported after serving reduced sentences as part of a prisoner exchange in 1983. Petition stayed in federal custody, was never part of any swap, and died in prison in 1997. The FBI kept digging into the question of how many Sears catalogs might have carried hidden messages. Their review went on for another full year. Agents pulled every edition back to 1975, the period when Petition was first believed to have been contacted by Soviet intelligence. By the end of the review, they uncovered coded messages in 12 separate editions, including several specialty catalogs printed between 1977 and the spring of 1979. The fall 1979 catalog and every big book that came after it stayed clean. By then, the FBI had already stepped in and, without much noise, worked with Sears to set up tougher checks on all catalog text. The idea was simple: stop anything like this from slipping through again. Sears was never treated as a guilty party. The company had been used by a Soviet agent who had slipped into its staff, and there was nothing to show that anyone at Sears besides Petition had the slightest idea of what was going on. Michael Hartley's part stayed buried for many years. He and his family were told to keep quiet, and they did. Their daily life slowly settled back into place, even if that new normal meant the occasional knock on the door from FBI agents who wanted more details or hoped Michael could look at another odd phrase or suspicious layout in some unrelated document. Michael returned to school. He went back to his math classes, to the notebooks where he kept lines of ciphers, patterns, and long calculations. His teachers never guessed that the quiet kid who avoided eye contact had solved a Soviet spy code. His classmates had no idea that the boy scribbling advanced math in the back row had helped the FBI pull off one of the most important counterintelligence arrests of the late Cold War years. Michael Hartley finished high school in 1983. He went on to MIT to study mathematics, earned a Ph.D. in 1991, and then built a strong career in cryptography and computer security. In time, he joined a defense contractor and worked on classified systems. He never spoke in public about the Sears catalog case again. Still, people who spent time with him and understood his past said he always kept an eye out for patterns, codes, and odd signals that other folks would overlook. The Sears catalog itself kept circulating until 1993. That year, the company shut down the big book and shifted to smaller specialty catalogs as shopping habits changed and computerized ordering spread. At its height, the catalog reached about 40 million households across the United States and was probably the single most widely distributed document in the country. How many people received those catalogs between 1977 and 1979 without catching the hidden pattern? Millions. And only Michael Hartley spotted it. Only he had the kind of mind that noticed those slightly stiff, out-of-place lines and decided they deserved a closer look. In the huge world of Cold War intelligence and counterintelligence, with all its satellites, powerful computers, and teams of analysts, it was the focus of one 13-year-old boy that uncovered what everyone else had missed.